The air in the first-class waiting area at Denver Airport grew heavy, as if a small storm brewed beneath the surface. Cold white lights illuminated the polished stone floor, reflecting the hurried footsteps of passengers. Announcements crackled steadily over the speakers, blending with the roll of suitcases and hushed conversations. But in this corner, everything seemed to still. Amid the crowd, a man stood quietly in the first-class line. That man was Jonathan Roumie. He wore a navy button-down shirt, comfortable jeans, and worn-in shoes carrying a faded backpack. Nothing about him stood out except the serene calm in his eyes. A simple wooden cross necklace hung loosely around his neck, unassuming, yet carrying a strange allure, as if it whispered a story no one dared to ask. Jonathan stood there unhurried, unlike those around him. His eyes swept over the crowd, observing without judgment, as if savoring each moment. He paid no mind to the curious glances or the contrast between himself and the other passengers, decked out in tailored suits and glossy luggage. The wooden cross swayed gently as he moved, a small but meaningful mark tied to years of faith and his role as Jesus in The Chosen. He had no inkling it would spark a confrontation on this routine flight. Just behind him, another figure emerged. That was Sarah Thompson, a flight attendant with a tall frame and stern expression. She wore a crisp uniform, white-gloved hands, and sharp eyes scanning the line. When her gaze landed on Jonathan's necklace, a flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "Sir, I must ask you to remove that necklace or tuck it under your shirt," she said firmly, pointing directly at the wooden cross. Her voice cut through the quiet, startling a few nearby passengers who looked up surprised by the sudden tension. Jonathan froze, his hand instinctively touching the cross. His eyes widened, blending confusion with disbelief. "Sorry, what did you say?" he asked softly, meeting Sarah's hard stare. The cross wasn't large or gaudy, just a simple carved piece on a leather cord, a symbol of faith he'd worn on countless flights through roles and private moments. He never imagined it would stir trouble on a standard Denver to Chicago trip. Sarah shifted her weight to one foot, crossing her arms clearly, uneasy but resolute. "We've received complaints about openly displaying religious symbols," she explained, her voice lowered yet audible to nearby passengers. "It might disturb others, and our airline policy promotes a neutral environment, especially in first class." She waved her hand vaguely around the cabin, though no one else seemed to notice the necklace but her. Jonathan was known for his gentle nature on screen and off, the same calming presence that had won millions through his portrayal of Jesus, now evident in how he faced this unexpected challenge. "I've worn this cross on dozens of flights before and never had an issue," he replied evenly, his tone respectful despite the public scrutiny. "Could you show me the airline policy that states religious symbols aren't allowed to be visible?" The first-class passengers were now openly watching. A man across the aisle ducked lower, pretending to read a magazine, but clearly listening. Two women ahead turned, halting their conversation, their curious gazes fixed on Jonathan and Sarah. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted, tension rippling as this confrontation unfolded before takeoff. That morning, Jonathan had arrived at Denver Airport in a casual outfit, his beard neatly trimmed and hairstyled loosely. The wooden cross was the only standout, not for its material value, but its deep spiritual meaning. Passing through security, a few fans recognized him, approaching respectfully for quick photos or to share how The Chosen had changed their lives. Jonathan smiled warmly, thanking them sincerely, then headed to the first-class lounge to reply to emails before boarding. This trip was to Chicago, where he'd attend interviews for the new season of The Chosen, a crowd-funded series bringing Jesus' story to audiences with authenticity and accessibility. In the lounge, he sipped coffee, occasionally checking messages from his manager about last-minute schedule changes. He looked forward to sharing updates with fans who'd made the series a global phenomenon. When the boarding announcement came, Jonathan gathered his carry-on and moved to the gate, ticket in hand. The gate agent recognized him, smiling and mentioning how her family loved The Chosen weekly. Jonathan replied with humble gratitude, free of any celebrity airs. Boarding the plane, he chose a window seat in the third row, stowing his bag and pulling out a book he'd meant to finish. Other passengers filed in, flight attendants offering pre-departure drinks, the gentle hum of conversation filling the cabin. Everything seemed routine until Sarah, the lead flight attendant with 15 years of experience, noticed Jonathan's cross. When he requested water with a smile, she nodded professionally, but her eyes lingered on the wooden piece, a brief look of disapproval passing before she moved on. Jonathan didn't notice returning to his reading as the cabin filled. 20 minutes later, with boarding nearly complete and the crew preparing for departure, Sarah returned. Her demeanor shifted. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, leaning closer to avoid being overheard. "I need to address the religious necklace you're wearing." Her tone was polite but firm, the voice of someone handling a rule-breaking passenger. Jonathan looked up, puzzled, his finger marking his place in the book. "My cross," he asked, glancing at the simple symbol. Is there a problem? His question stemmed from innocence, as he'd never faced this issue despite frequent flights. Sarah maintained her professional smile, though her eyes betrayed tension. "Our airline aims to create a comfortable environment for all passengers, and some might find religious symbols unsettling or divisive," she explained smoothly. "We typically ask that such items be concealed during the flight, especially in first class, where customers expect a premium experience." Jonathan set his book aside, giving Sarah his full attention as he processed her request. "I understand your concern for other passengers," he began calmly, "but this cross is a personal expression of my faith, not meant to discomfort anyone." He spoke softly yet with clear conviction, holding her gaze. "I've never been asked to hide it on any flight before." The man across the aisle glanced over, feigning interest in his magazine, but clearly listening. The two women ahead turned, pausing their chat, and the first-class cabin's atmosphere began to shift as attention focused on row 3. The air in the first-class cabin at Denver Airport began to shift as attention converged on row 3. Jonathan set his book aside, focusing entirely on Sarah, weighing her words. He felt the eyes of surrounding passengers, but kept his voice steady, unshaken by the growing tension. "I understand your concern for other passengers," he said gently, yet firmly. "But this cross is a personal expression of my faith, not intended to disturb anyone. I've never been asked to hide it on any flight before." Sarah held her professional smile, though her eyes revealed strain. "I respect its personal meaning to you," she replied, her voice slightly strained, "but we serve passengers from diverse backgrounds. Our airline policy encourages a neutral environment, especially in first class, where guests expect a premium experience. Perhaps you could just tuck it under your shirt during the flight, and that would resolve things." She gestured toward the cross, though no one else seemed to care. Jonathan took a deep breath, considering his response carefully. "Could you show me the specific airline policy that addresses religious symbols?" he asked, his tone still respectful, despite the awkwardness escalating. "I fly often and have reviewed your passenger guidelines, but I don't recall anything prohibiting a visible cross necklace." Nearby passengers began watching more openly. The man across the aisle leaned lower, pretending to read his magazine, but tilting an ear toward the exchange. The two women ahead leaned in, halting their conversation, their curious eyes fixed on Jonathan and Sarah. Sarah hesitated, clearly unprepared to be pressed for details. "It falls under our general guidelines for passenger conduct and fostering an inclusive environment," she replied, her voice losing some of its earlier certainty. "We have discretion to handle situations that might disrupt other travelers' comfort." Jonathan nodded, his expression calm. "I see. But has someone specifically complained about my cross, or are you anticipating someone might be uncomfortable?" The question was direct, but lacked accusation, a simple demand for clarity. The tension in Sarah's stance grew, her professional smile cracking as the conversation stretched beyond her expectations. "We try to address potential issues proactively," she answered, her eyes darting around the cabin. "Religious symbols can be sensitive in confined spaces like an aircraft." By now, several passengers were staring openly, some frowning in confusion, others showing disapproval, though it wasn't clear whether it was aimed at Jonathan or Sarah. An older woman 2 rows ahead turned, fully lowering her reading glasses to watch more closely. "I respect that you're doing your job," Jonathan said gently, "but I'm not comfortable removing or hiding my cross. It's not just jewelry to me, it's a symbol of faith central to who I am." His voice remained even, free of confrontation despite the growing public attention. Sarah frowned, her smile stiffening. "Sir, if you refuse to follow crew instructions, I'll need to consult the captain before takeoff," she said, her tone sharpening. "We have the authority to deny boarding to non-compliant passengers." A soft murmur spread through the cabin, the air growing heavy with the threat. The man across the aisle lowered his magazine, no longer hiding his curiosity. An older gentleman in the front row shifted as if considering stepping in. Jonathan blinked, taken aback by the escalation, but held his composure. "Are you saying I might be removed from this flight for wearing a cross necklace?" He asked, his voice low but tinged with disbelief. "I'm not causing a disturbance or breaking any rules I'm aware of." The situation had moved beyond awkwardness into something more serious, and Jonathan seemed to be adjusting to this shift in real time. "I'm simply asking you to comply with a reasonable crew request," Sarah replied, her tone growing defensive as she noticed the passenger's attention. "All travelers are expected to follow crew instructions during a flight regardless of the nature of those instructions." Her hand brushed her collar nervously, a clear sign of unease. A middle-aged woman with gray hair across the aisle leaned forward, her voice polite but firm. "Excuse me," she interjected, locking eyes with Sarah. "I fly this airline at least twice a month and have never heard of a policy against religious symbols. I'm wearing a cross under my blouse right now. Should I be worried?" Sarah turned, startled by the unexpected intervention. "Ma'am, I'm handling a situation with this passenger," she replied, maintaining a strained professionalism. "There's no need to worry about your jewelry." The distinction she tried to draw only underscored the inconsistency, a fact not lost on the increasingly attentive audience in the first-class cabin. Jonathan observed, his voice low but pointed. "It seems I'm being singled out specifically," he noted, his gaze steady as he looked up at Sarah. "If your concern is about religious symbols in general, shouldn't you be addressing all passengers wearing them?" The question was logical, not accusatory, highlighting the selective application of this supposed policy. Another flight attendant named Sarah, according to her name tag, approached cautiously from the galley, assessing the scene. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" she asked quietly, her expression concerned as she took in the situation. Sarah Thompson stood rigid beside Jonathan's seat while several passengers showed curiosity or disapproval. Before Sarah could respond, a man in his 40s from the row behind spoke up. "Wait a minute, aren't you Jonathan Roumie from The Chosen?" His voice carried, drawing more heads toward Jonathan's seat. Attention in the cabin surged as passengers connected the man, asked to hide his cross with his role as Jesus. Jonathan smiled faintly, accustomed to recognition, but unwilling to let it overshadow the issue. "Yes, that's me," he confirmed simply, then turned back to Sarah. "But regardless of what I do, asking anyone to conceal a symbol of their faith raises important questions about respect and religious freedom." The younger Sarah glanced between the two, gradually grasping both Jonathan's identity and the oddity of the request. "Sarah, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked softly, gesturing toward the galley. "I think we should discuss this before taking further action." Sarah Thompson hesitated, her authority challenged by passengers and a colleague. "Sir, please consider my request while I consult with my team," she said to Jonathan, her tone still firm, but wavering slightly, then followed the younger Sarah forward, their hushed conversation beginning. As the two attendants stepped away, several passengers leaned toward Jonathan, their expressions offering support or curiosity. "I can't believe she asked you to hide your cross," the gray-haired woman said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've flown for 40 years and never encountered that." Jonathan smiled gratefully, though a hint of tension lingered in his eyes after the confrontation. The man who recognized him extended his hand across the aisle. "I'm David Henderson. My family loves your portrayal in The Chosen," he said warmly. The irony of asking the man who plays Jesus to hide his cross isn't lost on anyone. A light chuckle rippled through, easing some tension, but the cabin's atmosphere remained heavy, awaiting the next move from the galley. The light chuckle rippled through, easing some tension, but the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained heavy, awaiting the next move from the galley. Jonathan sat still, his hand resting lightly on the now-closed book, the wooden cross still gleaming under the cabin lights. He felt the subtle chaos around him but kept his gaze serene, as if anticipating a turning point. The gray-haired woman beside him nodded at him, her eyes filled with admiration. "Unbelievable," she murmured, her voice laced with empathy. David Henderson, a The Chosen fan, smiled warmly, his hand still outstretched across the aisle. "My family adores your role," he repeated, "and the way you handled this is incredible." Jonathan shook David's hand, a faint smile on his lips. "Thanks for watching the show," he replied sincerely. We pour our hearts into it, and hearing that means a lot. He didn't want his fame to overshadow the issue, but the support bolstered his resolve. Meanwhile, at the front, the conversation between Sarah Thompson and the younger Sarah named Sarah on her name tag was growing heated. The younger Sarah, with worried eyes, spoke more, gesturing toward Jonathan's seat. Sarah Thompson stood rigid, her shoulders tense, clearly fighting to hold her ground. Then a tall figure emerged from the cockpit. It was Captain Daniel Carter, his silver hair and confident demeanor marking decades of experience. He listened to the two attendants for a moment, his expression thoughtful yet unreadable, then nodded to the younger Sarah. He strode toward row 3, the cabin's air growing thick with anticipation. Passengers followed his every step, their eyes glued to him, as if witnessing a drama reaching its climax. Mr. Roumie, Captain Carter began, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to tough situations. He extended his hand and Jonathan shook it firmly. I'm Captain Daniel Carter, he introduced himself. I understand there's been some confusion regarding airline policy about personal items. Jonathan nodded, his tone respectful. Yes, sir. I was asked to remove or hide my cross, and I'm trying to understand which policy requires that. Captain Carter nodded, his gaze sweeping over the wooden cross before meeting Jonathan's eyes. I want to be clear, he said, his voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Our airline has no policy prohibiting passengers from wearing religious symbols. We value diversity and respect the personal faith expressions of all our customers and crew. A wave of relief washed through the cabin, some nodding in approval, others exchanging satisfied glances. Sarah Thompson, standing a short distance away, stiffened, her face flushing with embarrassment mixed with defiance as her explanation was publicly overturned. Jonathan smiled, faintly grateful. Thank you for clarifying that, Captain. I don't want to disrupt the flight, but my faith is very important to me. The cross caught the cabin light as he spoke, the center of this unexpected controversy. Captain Carter looked at Jonathan, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. No disruption at all, Mr. Roumie. We're glad to have you on board, he replied, his tone warming. He turned to the cabin, shifting to a professional command. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be pushing back from the gate in about 5 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and return your seats to the upright position. His words closed the public discussion, and as he passed Sarah Thompson, he paused to whisper something inaudible. She nodded stiffly, her lips pressed tight, then retreated silently to the galley. The younger Sarah approached Jonathan's seat, an apologetic smile on her face. Mr. Roumie, I want to apologize for any inconvenience this caused, she said softly. Can I get you anything before takeoff? Jonathan smiled, his shoulders relaxing as the tension eased. Just water, please. Thank you, he replied gently. She nodded, hurrying to the galley and returning with a bottle, placing it on his armrest with another apologetic smile. The plane began to push back from the gate, and the safety demonstration played. The familiar sounds of air travel resumed, though a lingering awareness hung over the first-class cabin. Passengers occasionally glanced at Jonathan, whispering to each other about what they'd witnessed. Jonathan reopened his book, trying to focus on the page, but the adrenaline from the confrontation made him reread the same paragraph. He shook his head, his hand unconsciously brushing the cross, seeking comfort. The seat beside him remained empty, a small mercy, granting him space to reflect. The plane took off, piercing through the clouds, leaving the ground and its troubles behind. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers began to settle, some reclining seats, others pulling out laptops or tablets. The younger Sarah returned with drinks at cruising altitude, moving swiftly through the cabin with a warm smile. Reaching Jonathan's row, she asked quietly, "Are you okay?" as she handed him the sparkling water he'd requested. "I'm fine, thank you," Jonathan assured her, accepting it with a grateful nod. "These things happen, and it's all resolved now." His ease softened some of her concern, though a trace of guilt lingered. "Not all flight attendants think like Melissa," she said softly, glancing toward the galley where Sarah Thompson prepared the meal cart. "Many of us have faith too. Your show has meant a lot to my family." Jonathan's eyes brightened with the unexpected connection. "That's wonderful to hear, thank you," he replied sincerely. "We strive to make the series as authentic as possible." The conversation shifted to the chosen, a positive moment dispelling earlier tension. She moved on to serve others while the man across the aisle, Michael Chen, leaned toward Jonathan. "I'm not very religious," he said, friendly, "but what happened earlier didn't sit right with me." He shook his head, introducing himself as a tech executive heading to Chicago for a conference. Jonathan shook his hand, smiling. Thanks for saying that. You don't need to share my beliefs, just respecting the right to express faith peacefully is enough. The two fell into easy conversation, their shared experience forging an unexpected bond. Meanwhile, in the galley, Sarah Thompson moved stiffly, her tense face betraying strain as she arranged the meal cart, avoiding eye contact with passengers or the younger Sarah, who worked with smooth efficiency. In the galley, Sarah Thompson moved stiffly, her tense face betraying strain as she arranged the meal cart, avoiding eye contact with passengers or the younger Sarah, who worked with smooth efficiency. Captain Daniel Carter's voice came over the intercom, announcing the flight path and expected arrival time in Chicago, restoring a layer of normalcy to the first-class cabin. Yet passengers' eyes occasionally flicked toward Jonathan or Sarah Thompson, as if the incident still lingered in their minds. The atmosphere settled as the meal service began, but the contrast between the two flight attendants grew more pronounced. The younger Sarah glided through the cabin with natural warmth, exchanging brief words with passengers as she served their meals. In contrast, Sarah Thompson performed her duties with technical precision but emotional distance, limiting her interactions to the bare minimum. When she reached Jonathan's row with the meal cart, a palpable tension hung in the air as their eyes met briefly. She placed his meal on his tray without a word, her gaze carefully avoiding the wooden cross still visible around his neck. Jonathan thanked her politely, but she had already moved on, offering no acknowledgement. The cabin fell silent as passengers ate, punctuated only by soft murmurs and the distant hum of the aircraft. Jonathan ate slowly, occasionally exchanging a few words with Michael Chen across the aisle, but mostly lost in thought, his eyes drifting to the window where the Midwest plains passed below. After the trays were cleared, he pulled out his notebook, his pen moving steadily across the page. A passenger returning from the lavatory whispered to her seatmate, "He's probably writing dialogue for the next season." Her tone held respect, not intrusion. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin settled into the quiet rhythm of a long journey. Most passengers worked on laptops or watched in-flight entertainment. Jonathan put away his notebook and closed his eyes, perhaps resting or praying, the peaceful expression on his face suggesting either. Then the younger Sarah appeared beside his seat, leaning down to speak without disturbing others. "Mr. Roumie, the captain, would like to see you if you have a moment," she said quietly, her expression indicating this wasn't a continuation of the earlier issue. "He's on a break and asked if you might join him briefly near the galley." Jonathan opened his eyes, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he nodded and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Of course," he replied, rising to follow her. A few curious glances trailed them, but most passengers were absorbed in their own activities. Captain Daniel Carter stood near the galley, a cup of coffee in hand, his expression contemplative. "Mr. Roumie, thank you for joining me," he said warmly, extending his hand. Jonathan shook it firmly. "I wanted to speak with you privately about what happened earlier." "Thank you," Captain Jonathan replied respectfully. "Please call me Jonathan." The two stood in the cramped space near the galley, shielded from most passengers' view by the galley wall. "Jonathan, I want to personally apologize for your experience today." Captain Carter began, his voice low but sincere. "What happened doesn't reflect our airline's values or policies." He glanced briefly toward the galley where Sarah Thompson worked, then back to Jonathan with a serious expression. "Appropriate follow-up will occur, I assure you." Jonathan nodded, his tone calm. "I appreciate that, but I'm not looking to get anyone in trouble. We all have moments when personal feelings or biases affect our actions." His words reflected the compassion that defined his portrayal of Jesus, seeing beyond the offense to the human struggle beneath. Captain Carter's eyes widened slightly, a new respect evident. "That's generous of you," he acknowledged. "Still, this is an important learning opportunity for our crew." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Honestly, I'm a fan of your work. My wife and I watch The Chosen as soon as new episodes drop." A genuine smile spread across Jonathan's face at this unexpected connection. "That means a lot to hear. Thank you," he replied warmly. "We put everything we have into making it as authentic as possible." The conversation shifted naturally to the series, with Captain Carter sharing how it had impacted his family and deepened his own faith journey. Sarah Thompson stepped out from the galley, freezing when she saw Jonathan and the captain talking. Her expression flickered between embarrassment and defensiveness before she turned quickly back into the galley, avoiding any interaction. Captain Carter sighed softly. Sarah has been with the airline for many years, he said quietly. She's excellent in most respects, but clearly there are personal issues at play today. His tone suggested concern rather than condemnation, a leader weighing how to address a complex situation with a veteran employee. We all have our struggles, Jonathan replied thoughtfully. Faith can be a deeply personal topic that stirs unexpected emotions. I've had my own journey with doubt and belief over the years. His words weren't just polite. They showed genuine empathy, even for someone who had treated him poorly. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, touching on the chosen faith in the modern world and the challenges of living one's beliefs authentically in public. A bond formed between them, transcending their different professions and life paths. Captain Carter glanced at his watch. I should get back to the cockpit, he said with a smile. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Jonathan. I hope the rest of your flight is peaceful. He extended his hand again, adding, and thank you for your grace in a difficult situation. It's a powerful witness. Jonathan returned to his seat, feeling lighter, despite the earlier tension, the conversation with Captain Carter, offering an unexpected connection amid the day's strain. Michael Chen from across the aisle looked at him questioningly. Everything okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. When they call you to speak with the captain, it's usually not good news. His attempt at humor carried a genuine question about whether this was a continuation of the earlier issue or something new. Jonathan smiled reassuringly as he refastened his seatbelt. Everything's fine, he confirmed. The captain just wanted to chat about what happened earlier. Turns out he and his wife are fans of The Chosen, so we ended up talking about the show. The flight continued and the cabin's atmosphere gradually shifted. Passengers regarded Sarah Thompson with more critical eyes, while Jonathan received occasional smiles or nods of support as people passed by on their way to the lavatory. 3 hours into the flight, as the plane crossed the Midwest, Sarah Thompson's struggle became more visible. Her professional facade cracked, revealing flashes of distress as she moved through the cabin. The younger Sarah frequently covered for her, handling passenger requests that would typically fall to the lead attendant. Jonathan noticed this subtle dynamic but made no comment, treating both flight attendants with the same polite respect when they passed his row. He focused on his book and notebook, occasionally glancing out the window at the landscape far below. As the plane prepared to land in Chicago, Sarah Thompson approached his row, clearly reluctant, a clipboard in hand. Mr. Roumie, she began, her voice strained but professional. We offer priority deplaning for first-class passengers with tight connections. Do you need assistance? No, thank you, Jonathan replied, meeting her gaze directly but without challenge. Chicago is my final destination today. The exchange was brief and functional, yet his consistent kindness seemed to affect Sarah. Her expression flickered with what might have been shame before she nodded and moved on. As the plane prepared to land in Chicago, Sarah Thompson moved away, her face briefly shadowed with shame before she nodded and turned. The aircraft touched down smoothly at O'Hare Airport, taxiing toward the gate. Passengers began gathering their belongings, ready to disembark, but Jonathan remained seated leisurely, packing his notebook and book into his carry-on with care. As first-class passengers stood to retrieve items from the overhead bins, Sarah Thompson suddenly appeared beside his seat, clipboard in hand, her posture tense. Mr. Roumie, she said quietly, her voice nearly drowned by the shuffle of departing passengers. May I speak with you for a moment? Jonathan looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but he nodded promptly. Of course, he replied, staying seated as other passengers filed past toward the exit. Michael Chen hesitated, glancing between Jonathan and Sarah with concern, but Jonathan's reassuring nod prompted him to continue, offering a supportive smile before leaving. Once most passengers had disembarked, the first-class cabin fell into a rare stillness, leaving Jonathan and Sarah in a private bubble. Sarah took a deep breath, finally meeting Jonathan's eyes directly. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice steadier than before. My behavior at the start of this flight was unprofessional and disrespectful. Jonathan stayed silent, giving her space to continue without interruption, his expression open and free of judgment. The wooden cross still hung visibly around his neck, catching the faint cabin light. Honestly, Sarah went on, her voice dropping, I grew up in a religious household where faith was used to control and hurt, not to love. Her hands twisted together, a clear sign of discomfort as she revealed her vulnerability. When I saw your cross, it triggered something I thought I'd moved past years ago. Understanding dawned in Jonathan's eyes, compassion replacing any lingering tension from their earlier clash. Thank you for sharing that, he said gently. Faith should never be weaponized or used to cause pain. That goes against everything Jesus taught and lived. Sarah nodded slightly, a hint of moisture in her eyes, though she blinked it away quickly. Watching how you responded, patient instead of angry, respectful instead of defensive, made me realize I was repeating what I once hated from my past, she said, pausing to steady herself. I imposed my issues on you, and that wasn't fair or professional. We all carry wounds from our past, Jonathan replied thoughtfully. The challenge is recognizing when they affect our present actions. His words held no trace of superiority, only wisdom transcending the specific moment. Thank you for your courage in acknowledging this. It's not easy. Sarah's shoulders relaxed, her defensive shield melting away. I've watched a few episodes of The Chosen, she admitted, a faint smile tugging at her lips. My sister's a huge fan and keeps pushing me to try it. After today, I think I will. Jonathan's face lit up with the unexpected turn. I hope you find something meaningful in it, he said sincerely. We strive to portray Jesus as fully human, as well as divine, someone who understands our struggles because he experienced them himself. Sarah nodded, reflecting. What surprised me today was that you didn't make a scene or demand an apology in front of everyone. Instead, you held your dignity, and it made me question my assumptions about people of faith. The last passengers exited the cabin and the cleaning crew appeared at the front, pausing when they noticed the ongoing conversation. Sarah glanced at them, then back at Jonathan. I should let you go, she said, straightening her posture as her professional demeanor returned. Thank you for your understanding today. It was more than I deserved. Jonathan smiled, reaching into his bag for a small card. Before you go, I'd like to give you this, he said, handing her a card with the Chosen logo. It has info on where to watch the show if you're interested. No pressure, but your sister might enjoy watching with you. Sarah looked at the card, then up at Jonathan, curiosity replacing her earlier defensiveness. I think I'd like that, she said, slipping it into her pocket. And again, I'm truly sorry for how this flight began. Her apology now carried genuine sincerity, a sign of real change within her. Apology accepted, Jonathan replied, simply standing to gather his carry-on. I hope you have a good rest of your day, Sarah. With a final smile, he left the cabin, nodding politely to the cleaning crew as he passed. On the jet bridge, Jonathan stepped into the terminal, a mix of emotions swirling within him, the lingering tension from the confrontation, gratitude for its resolution, and quiet satisfaction that something meaningful had emerged from a difficult experience. The wooden cross tapped gently against his chest with each step, a physical reminder of the faith he'd stood firm for today. In the terminal, a few passengers from the flight lingered near the gate, including Michael Chen and the gray-haired Dr. Eleanor Simmons. They approached as Jonathan emerged, their eyes reflecting support and curiosity. That was something else back there, Michael commented, falling into step beside him. I've never seen anything like that on a flight before. Is everything resolved? Dr. Eleanor asked, concern evident in her voice. That flight attendant's behavior was completely out of line. Her indignation lingered, though Jonathan's calm presence seemed to temper it. Everything's resolved, Jonathan assured them both with a gentle smile. We actually had a good conversation after everyone disembarked. Sometimes challenging moments lead to unexpected understanding. Dr. Eleanor looked skeptical, but impressed by his positive outlook. You handled it with remarkable grace, she observed, her voice carrying the weight of a life rich with experience. Few people would stay so composed when singled out like that. The three continued toward baggage claim, their conversation shifting naturally from the incident to the Chosen and their various reasons for traveling to Chicago. What began as a confrontation over faith had transformed into an unexpected connection among strangers, bridging differences of background and belief. 2 days later, as Jonathan prepared for his first media interview in Chicago, his phone pinged with an Instagram notification. Opening the app, he found a message in his request from an unfamiliar account. Its profile picture, a sunset rather than a person, the message grabbed his attention immediately. You might not remember me, but I was your flight attendant 2 days ago. I wanted you to know I watched the first episode of The Chosen with my sister last night. Seeing Jesus portrayed as someone who understands human struggles rather than just judges them has given me a lot to think about. Thank you for your kindness when I showed you none, Sarah. Jonathan sat quietly reflecting on this unexpected follow-up. After considering his response, he typed a simple reply. Thank you for letting me know, Sarah. That means a lot to hear. Wishing you all the best in your journey, adding a heart emoji. A small smile crossed his face as he pondered the ripples that sometimes spread from standing firm in faith with compassion. 3 weeks later, at a panel discussion about The Chosen in Los Angeles, an audience member asked how his faith influenced his daily life outside his professional role. Jonathan pondered the question thoughtfully before sharing an anonymized version of the flight incident. Recently, I was challenged about wearing my cross necklace in a public setting. He began, his hand unconsciously touching the wooden symbol still around his neck. It would have been easier to comply and avoid conflict, but sometimes faith calls us to stand firm, albeit with gentleness and respect. The audience listened intently as he continued. What started as a confrontation ended with a meaningful conversation about how faith can be misused or healing. That person later messaged me saying they'd begun watching The Chosen and were seeing Jesus in a new light, not as a judge, but as someone who understands human struggles. He smiled warmly. So, to answer your question, living my faith daily isn't about making grand statements or performing for others. It's about those authentic moments, standing firm in belief while responding with love to those who see the world differently. Applause erupted, many nodding in recognition of the universal challenge of living one's deepest values amid opposition. Jonathan's story from the wooden cross to Sarah's apology left an indelible mark on the power of faith lived through action.